Hello, I'm James Andrews. I'm a reporter with Food Safety News. I'm here at Food Safety Summit 2015 in Baltimore, Maryland, and I'm here with Tim Lytton. He's a administrative law professor at Albany Law School, and he's the author of an upcoming book called Outbreak: The Evolution of the U.S. Food Safety System. So, Tim, what do you get when you come to a conference like this? What are you looking to learn?
Well, I'm interested in trying to figure out how the U.S. food safety system is structured, and it's obviously a very large and complex system, and it really has global reach. So I'm interested in three main areas of food safety, one of which is government regulation. That occurs among a number of different federal agencies, and also at the federal, state, and local level. So that's a very complex system in and of itself. The second area of food safety, or the second system in food safety, is private certification and supply chain management. And that's a lot of the efforts that have been undertaken, especially in the last 10 or 15 years, around supply chain management, GFSI, certification audits for food safety, and a lot of industry advances that have occurred, and we've seen growing sophistication. And the third area is the liability system, lawsuits, which in some ways kick-started a lot of these advances, and also involve not only trials and tort lawyers and the types of things you see on the news, but also the more quiet activity of liability underwriters, that is insurance companies, who are busy trying to sell policies to a lot of the companies to protect them from this sort of devastating lawsuit that might come along. And those insurance companies play also an important role in helping to manage the risk at the local level.
And so we were talking a little bit earlier about how there isn't really much of a presence of talking about litigation, talking about insurance, while there is a lot of presence talking about regulation and supply chain management. Why do you think we're not talking about the liability side of this, and why do you think it's important to talk about that?
I think we're in a time of transition, cultural transition about food safety culture. And I think if you go back about 10 or 15 years, you would find a lot of mutual suspicion and really not a lot of dialogue between government regulators on one hand and industry supply chain managers on another. There was a sense that the government was very heavy-handed, that the government had a certain set of interests in its own professional culture, and that regulators were a different breed than industry people, and that they didn't talk to each other that much, and there wasn't as much information sharing. I think that's really beginning to change, and one can see at this conference a lot of dedication to the idea of the importance of dialogue and growing relationships between the government and government regulators. We see a lot of people from USDA and FDA sitting on panels with people who work in industry, major players in the industry like Hormel or major retailers. And we've seen a lot of panels in which they're talking a lot about how important it is to create better relationships, trust relationships, and importance of dialogue between government regulators and industry. Now, while that cultural change has begun to occur and we see much more relationship between government and this government branch of food safety and industry, we're not quite seeing as much between tort litigation and liability underwriters and the industry. And I think that's partly because the industry has been meeting and talking to a lot of the people who are in the tort system in adversarial conversations, in adversarial places like in court. Litigation is a very uncomfortable and a difficult place to have conversation. I think it leaves a lot of hard feelings. And so while there have been efforts on both sides to spark dialogue, I think that dialogue is yet to come. There's still a strong professional cultural barrier between people who work in food safety and industry and people who are litigators.
Do you see this changing at all in the future? Do you see potentially, the gap being bridged between litigators and the industry for any reason?
I think we're likely to see more dialogue as we move forward. I think just as there's been a détente or a softening of the hard feelings between regulators in government and industry supply chain managers and operating executives, I think that we're also likely to see more of a softening between industry and the tort system. And the reason is because in the end of the day, everybody in the industry is going to need liability insurance. They know they need liability insurance, and liability underwriters, who are only in the business because there's liability out there and there's liability exposure, are increasingly drawing on the same sources of expertise to help counsel their clients about how to lower risk. Because if you're a liability insurer, you'd like to, as you extend a policy, make sure that the risk of some problem that you're going to have to pay for ultimately through coverage is lowered. And so you want to help your clients manage that risk. And in order to manage that risk, you're going to need to go to sources of expertise. You're going to need to learn how to manage risk. And it turns out that many of the same pool of experts who are helping government regulators, industry supply chain managers, and tort litigators and insurance companies are really all the same pool. And I think that pool is really the key to a growing dialogue among these different parts of the food safety system. And I think that's why we're seeing growing sophistication and expertise in all of these three areas: in government regulation, in supply chain management on the industry side, in auditing and GFSI, and also among litigators and insurance liability, insurance companies who are underwriting all these risks.
Yeah. Would you say you feel like things are moving in the right direction?
I think we've seen an enormous evolution in the food safety system, its sophistication in the networks of communication and growing expertise over the last 15 or 20 years. And I think we're in the midst of a lot of change, and I think conferences like this are really a place where you can see all of the cutting edge efforts to sort of move forward, and not just in terms of technology, but in terms of dialogue and mutual understanding. And I think that the conference has really been a great place to see a lot of that on display.
All right, Tim. Well, really looking forward to your book. Thank you for taking some time to speak with us.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.